Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Here is a little bit of background. I was 20 at the time. I moved in with my uncle in San Antonio, Texas with the agreement that I didn't have to pay rent as long as I helped him out with chores and my cousins. I got a job at a super known coffee chain downtown close to the touristy part of the area. We had a lot of regulars and a lot of homeless coming in and out. I felt relatively safe though because I got to know the people there and it was almost always a lot of foot traffic. I used to even take walks after work in the area, especially since I was super close to the Riverwalk. Skip to a couple of months into the job and I was friends with everyone I worked with. We were all super close. On this particular day, it was one of my co-workers' last day. There was about 3 guys who had been in there almost all morning. They hadn't bought anything and were just hanging out, which was not unusual for my location. On my break, I decided to walk down to a nearby drugstore so I can get a farewells card and maybe a small gift for said coworker. I walked out and put my earphones in, and before I could press play, I hear the door open behind me and footsteps following behind. Whoever it was caught up to me and started walking beside me, matching my pace exactly. I turned to look and it was one of the guys that had been there all morning. He was a bit taller than me. He tried to ask for my number and I kindly told him no. He persisted to deny with a short temper, told him to screw off. He stopped and stared at me in surprise. He stood there as I walked away and by the time I went back they were gone. I proceeded to tell my coworkers about the encounter and we laughed it off. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Every shift after that he would already be there just hanging out or would walk in mid-shift. Sometimes with somebody else and sometimes by himself. I assumed he was just another homeless person because how else was he always able to be around? My shifts were sporadic. Some days I opened, some days I closed, some days I worked mid, but it didn't matter, he was always there. At that point I started feeling paranoid. I would always catch him staring in my direction. He never ordered anything, never talked to me, and luckily wouldn't follow me. He would just sit there, watching me. I started mentioning it to my coworkers and they started noticing it too. One of my team leaders would help me out by sending me to wash dishes in the back or organize the cooler. My coworkers would also try and place themselves to try and block me from his view. I started feeling uncomfortable at work. Sometimes when I closed, a coworker would walk me to my car before heading home themselves. Or if I didn't close, they would walk me to my car and turn around and head back to work. Then one day of him just staring, I was working the register that day. He walked up and ordered a water. I asked for his name for his order. I now had his first name just in case. He took his water and sat down. I had mentioned him before to my manager, but because he hadn't really done anything, we couldn't do anything beside note it in the manager book. The next day I worked with my manager. It was him, 2 other co-workers, and me. I told him I had to go to the bathroom real quick. There were 2 bathrooms right next to each other, but sort of hidden from the coffee bar and register, and they weren't gender specific. I walked around the bar to the lobby area. I had to pass this table and walk down the lobby to get to the bathrooms. I noticed him get up before going inside the bathroom. I sat down to do my business when someone rattled the knob. I shouted out that it was occupied, but whoever it was kept rattling the door until I finished. When I opened the door, no one was there, and walking back I noticed him adjusting back into his chair. I was super freaked out and told my boss. He couldn't tell him anything because we had no proof that it was him. Later that shift he got up and picked up a coffee from the pickup area. My boss assumed that he had ordered it and let him take it. I told him it wasn't and that it wasn't even his name. My boss used this as an opportunity to tell him if he does something like that, he can't come back. The man apologized and actually stuck to the rules every day after that. He went back to just watching me. Cut to Valentine's Day. One of my team leaders and I would be scheduled to work certain Thursdays after close to deep clean the store. We would stay until 1 AM. This was one of those Thursdays. We were almost done and I had to clean the bathrooms as one of the last chores. I finished and as I walk out the bathroom, I see him peeking in with both his hands pressed to the window, eyes wide, just staring at me with this super intense look. I froze for a second, just staring back. I notice on one of his palms that is pressed to the window, a purple foam heart. He doesn't move at all. I freak out and run back into the bathroom. I shout, "Hannah, Hannah, he's here, he's back." She barely hears me through the music we were blasting. Hannah was the team lead who would help me hide me from him, so she knew the huge fear I had towards him. She walks towards the bathroom shouting back, "What are you saying? What's going on?" As soon as she gets close, she sees him. I told her again, "He's here, he's watching me." She started shouting through the window, "You need to leave. If you don't leave, we're calling the police." I step out a little to see if he'll leave and he's ignoring her and his eyes were fixated in my direction. I step back into the bathroom and my lead continues to shout at him to leave and threatens him with the police. About 5 minutes pass and he realizes that I'm not stepping out until he leaves, so he does. The next day, my lead and I told my manager I want to file a police report, and he tells me to wait until he talks to his boss. He shows up again that day, and I was only there to talk to my manager and leave right after. When I got home, a friend convinced me to call the cops. So I text my boss that I don't care what he or his boss says, I'm scared, and I'm gonna file that report. I dial 911 and tell them a summarized version. They tell me they're going to send someone to where I live to take the official report. The two officers were nice and supportive. I told them my whole story and how my boss didn't feel the need to get cops involved since I wasn't harmed. The officers told me that I should have called right away and defended me, saying they could get him for harassment. I thank them, and they tell me that if he shows up to dial 911 so they can take him in for trespassing and harassing. I think that day my manager banned him and warned him because he never showed up to the coffee shop again. A few months later, when I was comfortable again with downtown, I went out with some friends to walk around. We were close to where I worked at, and as we round a corner I see him, and so I ducked into a little corner store and my friends follow. I told them I saw him and they kept an eye out. Once he was out of view, we left the store, and that was the last time I saw him. I just hope that he never comes back. I'm in a school still and work for my family member on certain weekends at a local college selling concessions at the stadium. It's about twice a month, and the stadium is off towards the edge of town. It's Friday night and I just gotten out of school and I had to go straight to work. I get to work for 4 hours, half shift tonight, and my boss, my aunt, tells me we need more spoons for tomorrow's event. We sell ice cream, and these events have like 5,000 plus people at them. I say okay, and I'll go grab them on my way home. The only store open with heavy duty spoons is all the way on the other side of town, and I still wanted to go meet up with some of my friends and mess around. I decided to take the faster but more sketchy way around the outskirts of town. I live in a weather bipolar state. It snowed last night, but I figured the roads would be fine enough even if they weren't plowed. I take off to the store, and the first 5 minutes go by and nothing's wrong. I haven't seen a single car or any buildings the entire time, but keep in mind it's approaching 9 PM and I'm on the outskirts of town, and no one really takes this way in case they really have to. All of a sudden I see something in the corner of my eye, and it looks like a man, roughly 5'8" I'd say, wearing shorts, t-shirt, and a backwards hat. He's in the ditch, walking in snow when it's 10 degrees out. My first thought is to pull over, but I'm on the phone with my mom at the time and she warns me not to, as some things have happened before in this town. I consider stopping, but for some reason I tell myself not to. I wasn't really worried about anything. I pass the man, going about 40 miles per hour. Like I said, roads aren't the best. I drive not even 500 feet past him, and immediately, a car that I did not see at all before turns on and pulls out of a field entrance off the road and starts to follow me. At first I thought I just was focused on the man in the ditch and didn't see a road, and that's where they come from, but I later found out there was not a road there. I start to approach the town again and have to take some turns to get to where I'm going. I turn left, the car turns left. I turn right, the car turns right. I go around a roundabout and skip my turn and go twice as no one else was there. Car follows. At this point I start to worry a little, but maybe they just need to go to the store also. I then pull up to a stop sign and I turn without my turn signal. The car follows. Now at this point I should have went straight to the police station, but I still didn't think much of it. I'm 2 miles from the store, where plenty of people will be. I take a few more turns and the car continues to follow me. I completely blew a stop sign at a non-busy intersection and the car does a quick stop and go and catches up. At this point, I have 2 turns till the store, so I'm still not worried. I turn into the store and the car turns also. The store also has a gas station, so I pull there first to act like I was getting gas. The car sets off to the side of the road, in between gas station and store, and just sits there. I wait about 10 minutes and the car doesn't move. At this point, I start to get worried. I call my friends I'm supposed to meet up with later on and give them the license plate for worst case scenario, then take off to the store. I cross the street and the car comes straight behind me. I'm freaking out on the phone, not knowing if I should call the cops or not. I go and park as close as possible to the store, and the car parks 3 rows behind me and a couple down. It's getting late at this point and the store's closing soon. There's only a couple others in the lot. I turn my truck back on and go park on the complete opposite side of the lot. Get out and I completely bolt inside the store. I get spoons and take my time in the store. I go to call my friends to walk back outside and my phone is dead. I look out the sliding doors and suddenly there's a white van next to my driver's side. Looks like no one's in it, but the back windows are covered and it's running. I run to customer service and explain everything, but they think I'm some young kid messing around. At that time I didn't see the original follow car, but no way I'm going outside with that van next to my truck. After waiting for about 30 minutes, the van pulls forward, and the original car appears from the side of the building. I wait another 10 minutes and dash outside. I speed to my friend's house, and when I get there I park at his garage. My one buddy asked why there's a big orange mark on my tire, and my heart sinks. When I was inside, the follow car must have marked my tire. After inspecting the rest of my truck, we find a small pipe dropped in the bed of my truck surrounded by snow. It was wrapped in duct tape. It was not mine. I was alone, no phone, scared, in a part of town I'm not familiar with. I can't help but think what would have happened if I walked outside. Last December, I was visiting my family down in Florida and we spent some time in Treasure Island. My brother and I took my dog down to the beach at about 2 a.m. to play some fetch and drink and have a good time. If you walk along the water, you can reach a few restaurants and bars and hotels that line the beach. Out of nowhere, we see someone walking pretty quickly in our direction from over there, and a few minutes later, we can make out that they're being followed. My dog is arguably pretty well trained. We work search and rescue, and I've never once had her run off without permission, and never once has she not instantly returned when called, but that changed that night. She was about 5 feet from me and I saw her hackles shoot up and I went to grab her collar, but she took off in a full sprint, making some truly terrifying barking and growling sounds. We obviously took off after her and she reached the first person and stopped between them and the people behind them. She was barking and growling and lunging, and I finally caught up and put her on a leash. She's never reacted in that manner, so it was scary. The group following her ended up being 3 men that were probably in their early 30s. They started booking it in the other direction. I turned around and the person being followed was a young woman around my age. We asked if she was okay and she just broke down in tears and collapsed into my brother. So she got into her phone and rang her friend's number to have us talk to her. We were able to figure out where she was staying and walk her back to her hotel, where we met up with her friends and we all exchanged numbers to talk a later time. The next day we all got together where we learned she had gone out for a walk on the beach, stopped for a drink at the bar, drank a bit, and then just wasn't feeling right. So she left the bar and soon noticed 3 men left after her. She had been walking for about a mile at that point, terrified and slowly getting more and more screwed up. She doesn't remember much about that night and we knew she was probably on something, but we had no clue she'd been drugged. We're still friends now and we're all gonna meet up for spring break when we're all back in Florida. I've never been more proud of my dog and more grateful that we were in the right place at the right time. I hate thinking about what could have happened. I'm an extremely outdoorsy female and love to spend a lot of time in nature. I spent the better part of my early 20s living in remote northern locations and exploring a lot of Alaska, Yukon, and British Columbia. I have many odd, frightening, and bizarre stories that came up from my time in the north, and this is one of them. In the summer of 2012 when I was 22, I'm 26 now, I was living and working in a pretty remote town in northern British Columbia from May to September. The place I worked at was a campground in the provincial part of the Alaskan Highway, 4 hours north of Fort Nelson and 2 hours south of the Yukon-British Columbia border. The best part about this park was the fact that it had beautiful natural hot springs, which attracts tourists from all over North America every summer. I lived in an old trailer on a separate part of the campground where the rest of the staff lived. I quickly got used to living in a place where I had no running water, no electricity, no cell phone service, and no internet, and driving 4 hours to Fort Nelson every 2 weeks to get groceries and do my laundry. Life was pretty sweet. I got to hike, go for late night dips in the springs, make some traveling friends, and spend quality time in nature getting to know the flora and fauna of the landscape. My job at the campground was being a park facility operator, gatehouse attendant, wildlife interpreter, and sometimes had a few security shifts here and there. The feeling of living in the woods was much different than the feeling of living in a city, as far as safety goes. In the city I'm from, there are people around. You're aware of the fact that your house or apartment could get broken into, but emergency services are quick to respond and neighbors are also a plus. However, in the woods, I felt more vulnerable. The closest police were 4 hours away, and I lived in a trailer that was run down enough that it could easily get broken into. Plus, it was pretty dark and anyone could sneak around easily at night. One night, at probably around 2 in the morning, I'm asleep inside my trailer and I'm awoken up to a very loud banging on my trailer door. Reasonably shaken, I look outside the window next to my bed and see a car with its lights on, and 2 men standing at my door. I can feel the blood draining from my face. Through the door I say, "How can I help you?" and one of the guys, clearly hammered out of his mind, starts rambling on about something. No matter how hard I try, I cannot understand what he is saying. I say, "Sorry, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me," and the other guy starts frantically trying to explain something in the same drunken state as the first guy. I decide at this point that they don't mean any harm and I open the door to talk to them. They look visibly shaken and I can tell they are desperate for my help but don't have the mental capacity of a person sober enough to coherently tell me what's wrong. One of the dudes starts telling me a very long story that I managed to piece together through all of his slurring and hiccuping. Basically he says that him and his friend are on vacation, came up from Fort Nelson to party, they had a really long drive, were at the hot springs, they were having beers, and they were sorry about having beers. And then he drops the bomb that somebody's running around the campground, stabbing people. I look at the guy telling me the story and notice he has blood all over his clothing. I say, "Someone is going around stabbing people?" And he replies, "Yes, someone's running around stabbing everybody." Then the other guy yells, "Come on, let's go," and they hop into the aforementioned car and speed off before I can question them any further. Now I'm standing at my trailer door, in the darkness, alone, thinking there's a maniac running around wielding a knife. I have no phone, and I know that the only person who has a phone is the ranger, and his cabin is about a 5-minute walk away from my trailer. I remember that I have a radio, so I run inside my trailer, lock the door, and try to get the ranger on the radio. His radio is off, of course. The only thing I can do at this point is go to the ranger's cabin and notify him of the situation. I get to the ranger's cabin and pound on his door. He answers within a few minutes, visibly sleep deprived. And I tell him the whole story. While I'm there, he calls the police and they tell him that they are on the way and they will be there in 4 hours. The ranger grabs my gun, walks me back to my trailer and says, "Don't let anybody in." I stay up the rest of the night, listening for any sort of disturbance around me, the intense kind of listening where you're concentrating so hard on any external sounds that might be made that you almost feel deaf from the silence. After about 2 hours of doing this, my trailer starts rocking back and forth. I freeze. My heart drops. I can hear the sound of someone breathing extremely heavily and I'm thinking, this is it. I'm just sitting there on my bed in my trailer as it's rocking, waiting for the maniac to stop tormenting me and just break the window and stab me. I'm still listening intently to the heavy breathing and that's when I hear a grunt, a very non-human sounding grunt. I get a feeling that it's not what I think it is and I peer out the window of my trailer and a bison is scratching its back on the side of my trailer, causing it to rock back and forth. The RCPM get there at around 6:30 AM and proceed with their investigation for 10 hours. They close off the springs and the entire campground. We don't hear anything about what took place during the night until the investigation is over. Apparently there was a guy at the springs who made a lewd comment about one of the females in another group, which resulted in an argument. The guy disappeared and returned an hour later with a knife, stabbed 2 of the guys in the group and booked it back to Fort Nelson, not before stopping at my trailer with his buddy to tell me about the incident, of course. Yeah, one of the guys at my trailer, he was the dude stabbing people. My guess is that him and his friends stopped by my trailer to try to make it seem like they were innocent. Drunken logic. The 2 guys that were stabbed survived, which is good. I just hope that I never have to wake up to someone like that at my door again. A couple of years ago, I was still adjusting to the adult dating scene. I was using Tinder, and though I had been on a few dates and had a few hookups, it was mostly just situations where I either wasn't that interested in the guys, or it was strictly a one-night stand. It was a college town, not where I went to school, about 45 minutes from my parents' house, and I went on a few dates there. It's a cool city to hang out in, so it was always worth the journey even if a date didn't work out. I started chatting with this guy who I matched with on Tinder. He wasn't exactly my usual type, but he was charming enough. He was a little bit of the stoner/alternative type. He was funny and confident over the phone as well. I usually made it a rule for myself to chat on the phone at least once or twice before meeting up with guys, even just to gauge if we would be able to carry a conversation. It's not the same when you're only texting. We hit it off over the phone well enough to the point where I felt we should give hanging out a shot. We talked about how I went to karaoke night often at a local bar close to where I attended school. He said he and his friends liked going to karaoke too. Great. He lived in the previously mentioned college town, and I agreed to attending karaoke night with him and his friends. He said they were hanging out at a local coffee shop near where he and his roommate lived, and I could meet them there. A girl he knew worked there as well, and he said she'd give me a coffee on the house. Before leaving, I texted one of my friends where I was going, just to be safe. When I arrived, I could clearly see into the coffee shop. I could see a group of 4 scraggly looking dudes, and one girl behind the counter. As soon as I pulled up, I got a nagging bad feeling in my stomach. As soon as I got out of the car, the guy I'd been chatting with left his group and came out. He said they were leaving right now so we should just go. Not that I really cared about the coffee, but what happened to the coffee I was promised? I asked exactly what the plan was and he said they were going to head back to his place before heading to karaoke. He didn't ask if I wanted anything from the shop, and didn't even ask if I wanted to come in. By this point, his friends came out and they all got close to my car. I was getting pretty bad vibes at this point. He isn't acting charming or funny like before on the phone. Everything felt forced. There was an air from the group that they were only pretending to be friendly. Nobody introduced themselves, but they just kept saying how awesome karaoke at the bar was. The girl inside at the counter had gone in the back of the shop, and because she was friends with him, I didn't know if I could trust her. Thinking quickly, I said the plan sounded great and I could drive and meet them there, that I didn't want to leave my car there. This apparently was a problem. The one car in the parking lot, which I assumed was one of theirs, was the girls. They said they walked there, but it would be a lot better and faster if I just drove them back to the house. At this point I'm freaking out a bit. Everyone's close to my car and me. I tell them a stupid lie and say that I have a bunch of stuff from school in my car, and it's pretty messy on top of that, so not everyone will be able to fit in. Mind you, they are right by my car, standing in front of it. They can see through my windshield into it. It's got like a backpack in it, and that's just it. I just lie and say I'm kind of embarrassed because the floor is messy. I'm saying anything I can get to get out of this. I tell them I'm really sorry, but if they order an Uber, I could just meet them at their place. I'm not budging on not letting them get in my car. The guy I'm supposed to be on a date with tells the other guys to head back inside the coffee shop, and now I'm alone with him. He asks why I can't just drive everyone. He tells me it's not a big deal, and that it's just easier if I just drive everyone there. I stand firm that there's not room and my car's messy. I tell him I promise to meet him at his place if they order an Uber or walk, just text me his address. He says that it'll take too long to get back to his place, so I should just meet them at the bar instead. He won't give me his address. He texts me the address to the bar, and I apologize about the car thing. I tell him I'm so excited for karaoke and I'll meet him there. I smile and act as naturally as possible, and then I get in my car and try to drive normally while in view. As soon as I'm out of sight, I take off and just drive in different directions haphazardly before heading back home. I was constantly watching in my mirrors to see if anyone followed me, and thankfully nobody did. Not long after arriving home, I got multiple texts from him. He told me I was just another girl pretending to be nice and that I deserved to die. Clearly I made the right call. I blocked his number and blocked him on Tinder. I never heard from him again, and I hope it stays that way. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, but even now as an adult in my 30s, I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents had taken my sister and I out to a movie, and then to get ice cream in celebration of my older sister getting straight A's on her report card. I remember my dad had gotten off work later than usual, so by the time the movie was over and we had our ice cream, it was well past our bedtime. It didn't matter though. My parents were happy and proud of my sister. We had a great time, and we took our time getting home. If it wasn't for what happened when we got there, I would have always looked back fondly on this night. We got home at around 10:30. Bedtime was usually 10, so I went straight to my room to put my pajamas on while my sister went to brush her teeth. I remember thinking that it seemed a little more chilly in the house that night, but that's the only thing out of the ordinary I can recall from when we first walked in. I barely had a chance to change when I heard my dad yell our names from what I thought was the kitchen. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew it was bad because I heard fear in his voice for the first time ever. It scared me really bad. I bolted out the door and into the kitchen as fast as I could. My sister was already there, and her and my parents were standing very close. My mom looked like she was on the verge of panic, and she motioned for me to come close. She wrapped her arms around my sister and my dad was already dialing on the house phone. Then I noticed some glass on the floor. I asked my mom what was wrong, but she didn't want to tell me. She said we needed to go outside right away. As we headed out the front door, I heard my dad talking to a 911 operator and telling them that when we got home, he found our back sliding glass door shattered and objects strewn about the kitchen. He went to the neighbor's house and waited for the police to come. After a few minutes, my dad joined us. He seemed to be well shaken up, which was a new sight to me. The police arrived and searched the house extensively. It was a big scene with all of our neighbors outside, and flashing lights illuminating our entire street for hours. They never found anybody in our house. Whoever had been there had come and gone. The thing that gets to me is that nothing was stolen. Whoever it was didn't want any of our possessions. What they did take was our canned food out the pantry and stacked them into small pyramids on our kitchen counter. They also turned on the TV in the basement and moved a few random objects to different parts of the house. It was like someone had been in our home and did things for reasons that only made sense to them. As the police were finishing up and ready to leave, I heard one of them ask my mom a question. They talked quietly, and I'm sure they thought I didn't hear. I pretended not to be listening, but I heard everything. We kept magnetized letters on our fridge, and we used them to leave each other messages for fun sometimes. The cop was asking my mom if the message on there that night was done by any of us. It wasn't. I watched my mom turn pale when we told her what it said. It still makes my skin crawl to this very day. It said, "Always watching." The police didn't find any fingerprints. They said the intruder had to be wearing gloves. For the next few days, the entire family was extremely uneasy. Within a few months, we decided to move. It was all just too scary for us to stay in that area. We moved to a house several miles away. We were never bothered again, but I do still think about it. This happened many years ago, but the hairs on my neck still stand up sometimes to this day. I just wish that we never experienced something like that again. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. In April of last year, my boyfriend and I were walking home from our friend's house, and I had just finished my first year at college and we wanted to go out and celebrate and have some fun. We live in a rural town and our friend lived on the far side of it, so our walk was about a half an hour or so. I had a drink or two and smoked some of the joint they had rolled. Smoking makes me paranoid, and this night was no different. Anyway, we left at maybe 10 or 11 p.m. and everything was perfectly normal until we got to the end of the long street that would eventually lead to my house. This street always feels so long to walk on, like hours can pass and you can barely make a dent in the amount of steps made. The street we turned onto this road was maybe 10 blocks from my house. A few minutes after we turned onto this road, I felt like something was off, but my boyfriend said that I was stoned and reassured me that it was just that. This white pickup truck that was parked in front of some house turns on and begins to drive slowly away and would then park. I watched it to see if it was just me being paranoid or not, but it proceeded to stop a couple houses down and sat there with the car still on. As soon as we get close, it would drive away, parking a little further away. This continued on until we got to the end of my street. At this point, I kept telling my boyfriend that I'm not paranoid and that this truck was screwing with us and he had gone quiet. A couple houses down from mine, this truck drives to the end of the street, my house on the corner. There's a dead end by my house because we live near a river. It stops for a moment at the dead end and proceeds to turn on their high beams and begin to slowly drive towards us. My boyfriend sticks his arm out in front of me, stopping me from walking any further as this truck continues to approach. My house is so close, yet so far. This truck slowly drives by us. The windows are tinted, but we can see two silhouettes. And because they had blinded us, we didn't think to look at the license plates or even the model of the truck. My boyfriend, being pretty quick on his feet, waited until the truck disappeared from sight and took my hand before racing to my house and locking the door. He had thought about turning down one of the other streets so we could try to lose them, but he figured he'd wait until they were out of sight to book it to my house so they wouldn't see which house we went in. We looked out one of the front windows very carefully and saw this truck come back into view and began to drive around the block. I'm assuming looking for us. This went on for about 10 minutes. I called the police to inform them that we had been followed, but without the license plates or model, they could only keep their eyes open for suspicious white trucks. I was adamant that these people had to know one of us, if not me, because they drove until they were beside my house. Whether they actually knew it was my house or not, I don't know. My boyfriend tries to insist that it was probably a bunch of kids trying to mess with us, but I don't believe that. A few days later, we heard that someone was picked up and was last seen in a white truck. Since this night, there have been stories in the paper and online that people have been grabbing people and these people were trafficked in the area. I'm still seeing reports even today. So when I was about 15 or so, I would always go grocery shopping with my mom. This time she didn't just need groceries, but some other things that weren't close by. We lived out in the country and the closest town didn't have what she needed, so we went to the bigger town/city about an hour away. Our last stop was the grocery store, as my mom didn't want to leave a bunch of groceries in the car on a hot summer day while she got whatever else she needed. While we were there, I noticed an older man, tall, skinny, semi-ill looking, that was paying a lot of attention to us. I also caught him talking to himself a lot. I almost ran into him when we were switching aisles and I said sorry, and since then I had seen him like 5 times and every time I felt a shudder and I looked around and he would be somewhere staring at me. I told my mom and she said we were almost done. A few minutes later, we got distracted talking about ice cream. I was telling her about this ice cream brand that my brother, who's a health nut, told me about, and that it was supposed to be a lot better for you than well-known name brands. We started searching for it. I was on one end of the aisle and she was on the other. I ended up finding it and reached into the freezer to grab it. When I turned around, the old man was right behind me, like way too close. He said something like, "You're too pretty to be eating that. It'll rot your teeth." And I freaked out. I pushed past him and ran back to my mom and said, "Found it, let's go." And she saw the look on my face and looked past me and saw the man. We headed quickly for the registers, and unfortunately we had a lot of groceries and the old man got in the line next to us and only had a few things. He kept talking to himself. I was keeping a very close eye on him and was relieved when he exited the store, but unfortunately that wasn't the end of it. When we left the store, I noticed him sitting in his car outside the doors. He sat there and watched us put the groceries in the car and got behind us as we went to go leave the parking lot. I was freaking out. My mom told me it would be okay and that she was right there with me. We ended up taking some back roads home. My mom thought maybe he would get lost. As I said, we were about an hour away from home, and the back roads made it even longer. We were about 5 to 10 minutes away from home and he was still following us. When I asked my mom if I should call the cops, she said, "No, call your dad and tell him what's going on. Tell him to be waiting outside with a shotgun." So I called my dad and told him what was happening, and he had an idea. Since we lived way out in the country, my parents' neighbor was about half a mile down the road from us. They had a long driveway that you can't see their house from the road. He told me to have my mom go there instead so that the guy wouldn't know where we lived. My dad got there first, told the neighbor what was going on, and they both grabbed their shotguns and waited outside for us to pull up. The guy followed us down the long dirt driveway, and as soon as he got to the clearing with the house and saw my dad and our neighbor with their guns out, he threw his car into reverse and hightailed it out of there. So far since that incident, my family nor I have seen that man again, and I hope it stays that way. This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time, I found pills for my couch on the floor, stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat, or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up around 1 in the morning sweating from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower. So I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never closed it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection on my screen that showed someone was standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later steam was raising and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman and she screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little later she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife, just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing and realized there was only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat and was evicted after not paying rent. Seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work and sometimes at night. I just hope that I never have to experience that again. This happened 5 years ago. I was 25 and used to live alone in a small flat in England, about an hour south of London. It was a medium-sized town well known for being a good place to live, with excellent schools, low crime rates, and minimal unemployment. The kind of place where people didn't panic if they left their front door unlocked when they left for work. My flat was on the first floor above pavement level, midway down a hill. There was nobody underneath me. My flat was a kind of bridge with a footpath below it, and my kitchen window was directly over a pavement on a fairly busy road. The flat had a small galley kitchen, a living room, and an upstairs bedroom. There was nobody beneath or above my flat, and because of the hill, my kitchen window was literally face on with the pavement and where people walked. There was a printing company opposite that went out of business, and then just grass. I always used to close the blinds once the sun had gone down, but liked having the kitchen window open during the afternoons. It had a safety latch so it didn't open far enough for anybody to reach in, and I was not on the ground floor, so I didn't worry too much. One day, I got home from work early, about 5:30, and as it was summer, I had the kitchen window open and the blinds open. I'm chopping garlic for my dinner, glance up and see an older man literally stood on the pavement watching me, only a few feet away. I glare back as if to say go away and decide to walk out the kitchen into the living room as if I'm talking to someone. I walk back into the kitchen, glance at the window, and the man is still there, watching me with a small smile on his face. At this point I am slightly panicked. I am alone, nobody's around as I have no direct neighbors. I go into the living room and sit against the wall, clutching my phone. I didn't want him to be able to see me at all. A lot of front doors in England have a kind of two-door system. Directly on the street you have a glass door, normally with decorations on them so you can't see everything in and out, just blurred images, and a proper wooden door inside. I had been out for a smoke so the glass door was shut and locked, but the wooden door was wide open. From where I'm sitting, I can see the glass door, and I see a figure walking towards it. Sure enough, as it gets closer, I can see that it's the man from the pavement, standing at my front door and trying to look in. He tries opening the door, but luckily, I locked the outside door after my smoke, and it was a strong door. He drops a cigarette, says, "Screw it," and after about 15 to 20 seconds, he turns around and walks away. I run to shut and lock the wooden door and go to the kitchen window as he walks away and down the road. Just before he turns the corner, turns around and smiles at me, making eye contact. A few days later, it was on the local news that a man matching his description chased down a group of young women in my neighborhood. This happened almost 2 years ago. I had decided to go hiking with my son, who was 8 months old at the time, and with my dog named Henry, who is an Irish Wolfhound and Rottweiler mix. My husband was going fishing with a mutual friend at a state park nearby. I decided to go hike one of the more remote trails in a different part of the park and then meet them later. I drove to a wooded trail about 10 minutes from where my husband was fishing. It was an early spring day, still chilly but tolerable with the sun shining. I parked the car and got my son ready. He was smiling and laughing. I would wear him in a forward-facing hiking sling in the front of me at the time. Henry was excited. We started off on the hike and it was a really beautiful, peaceful trail. Towering trees mixed with pine. A crystal clear creek wove its way through the trail at points. We would periodically stop and all three of us would play. About an hour and a half into the hike, we had gone about 3 miles and rounded a narrow bend in the trail when we nearly collided with a gentleman in his late 40s or early 50s. Henry was snarling and lunging for the man. Before I even completely registered what was going on, I quickly backed up and pulled Henry back the best I could. My bumps were goosed at this point. Henry would not calm down. This is very unusual behavior for him, but not if he was trying to protect us. Trying to talk over Henry, I loudly said, "I'm sorry, Henry's just very protective of my son. If you move off to the side, we can pass you." My son was very quiet during this entire exchange, which I found a bit odd. The guy was staring very intently at my son. He then laughed slightly and said, "Oh, he should be. It's a good thing he's with you." Then he motioned to something around his neck and said, "I'm just out here taking pictures. It's a hobby of mine." Except he wasn't wearing any kind of camera around his neck or anywhere that I could see. He had a canteen around his neck. I politely asked him again to step aside so that we could pass. At this point, Henry was sitting down but growling still. Henry would not take his eyes off this guy. I have no doubt that Henry would have eviscerated this man if he had tried anything. I am positive this guy felt that. The guy looked at Henry for a few seconds, then at my son again. He took a few steps off trail so there was room to get by and so that Henry couldn't reach him when we went by. As I warily walked by him, he was like 10 feet to my left. He muttered something about how he used to be able to see his kids. I kept looking back as we walked away to make sure he wasn't turning around to walk our way. He did continue to stare after us for several minutes though until I could no longer see him. We kept hiking and eventually came to an opening point where cars would park. There was no one there and luckily I still had cell phone reception. I called my husband. He and his friend came to pick us up right away and they took us back to my car. There was no sign of the guy we encountered. We went home after that. Henry has since passed away and I am sad that my son doesn't get to grow up with him. He was really the best dog ever. So thanks Henry for being gentle yet fierce. I hope I never have to see that photographer ever again. This story happened about 2 years ago when I was 19 and my foster sister, Kira, was 16. It was the summer before I was going to college, and I mostly lived with my mom and Kira except for every other weekend, where I'd stay with my dad. Now, summers where I am can get really hot and humid, so we had a habit of waiting to walk the dogs until 6 or 7 p.m., because that's when it'd be cooler but still light outside. On this particular evening, Mom wasn't going to be home until late, so it was up to me and Kira to walk the dogs by ourselves, unless we wanted our younger dog, Samson, to throw tantrums due to pent-up energy. Even though we lived in the countryside and could have walked them down our street, Kira and I decided to drive out 20 minutes to a park instead. At around 7:30 p.m., Kira and I harnessed our 2 dogs, packed them up in the car, and drove them to the park. Let me quickly explain the layout of the park so that's easier to understand why we get nervous halfway through our walk. This park isn't very big, but it's popular because of its loop. The entire park is surrounded by a mile-long looping road with its attractions, like playgrounds, ponds, and a small country hall, spaced about in the inner side of the loop. The outer side is just grass, trees, and one playground at its end. Thus, it's common and expected to pass people walking the loop at least 2 times if you're walking in opposite directions, but not if you're walking in the same direction. Any cars on this road can only drive in one direction because it's a one-way road. At first, everything about this walk was normal. I parked the car, we clipped our dogs to leashes, and we started on the loop. Every so often, we'd stop so I could take pictures of our good boys, particularly of Kira trying to wrangle Samson, who pulls like his life depends on it and weaves around because he wants to smell everything. It was while I was taking one of these pictures that the first encounter happened. A man, who looked to be in his 40s, walked past us, walking the same direction we were, up towards the playground on the outer side of the loop. He smiled at Kira, nodded, and said, "Hello, you have cute dogs," and kept walking. I honestly didn't think anything of it. We're at a park at a time of day where it's common to walk around due to the cooler temperature, and people where I'm at are generally friendly. We smiled back and said hi and thanks, and that was that, or so we thought. This man passed us again only 10 minutes later, directly across from where we'd seen him previously. Just like he did before, he smiled and said hi. This time, Kira and I looked at each other once he was ahead of us and shared the, well, that was weird, expression. Just 10 minutes earlier, he had passed us walking up towards the playground and subsequently broke off from the loop, and he'd been walking in the same direction as us. This time though, he cut in front of us and he did it in a way where we had to stop to avoid running into him. He nearly touched Kira with how close he was walking. That was already weird in and of itself. The other weird part was him cutting past us in the opposite direction. It came off almost like he wanted to walk by us again, but just like before, Kira and I brushed this weirdness off. The guy could have been enjoying a rambling stroll and doing his own thing for all we knew. Not even 5 minutes later, the same man passed us again, once again cutting so close past us that he nearly brushed shoulders with Kira. Again, this time he walked up behind us, then did this weird directionally slant walk to cross the street and go in the opposite direction, cutting us off again. I told Kira to hustle so we could get to our car and get out instead of doing a second loop. When we were almost to our car, we noticed a car creeping along behind us. We pulled to the side and stopped to let it pass, but for a second it stopped too. We figured whoever was in the car was getting ready to park, so we started walking again. The car started creeping along behind us soon after we did, so we stopped again, and the car stopped with us. This was when Kira got nervous. We hadn't seen the middle-aged guy since the third cutoff, so we figured I had overthought the whole thing, but here we were, with this tinted windowed car acting weird. Was it the same guy, back with his car? A different guy? We couldn't tell. Before anything could happen though, another car idled up to the one next to us, and whoever it was sped up to the expected 5 miles per hour. We got to our car pretty fast after that and practically picked up the dogs to get them inside of it. We got in and got out of there. My mistake, however, was neglecting my rearview mirror and the well-advised rule not to drive straight home if you're worried a stranger's taken too much interest in you. We got home at around 8 something. The sun had finally disappeared behind the horizon. Mom wasn't home yet, so we got the dogs some water, locked the doors, ate a late dinner, chilled in the living room, and talked about things that didn't really matter. It was almost 9:30 when the scariest part of this whole ordeal happened. There Kira and I were, sitting on different couches, talking about something, when we noticed the ceiling briefly light up over where Kira was sitting. Due to our long, slightly curvy driveway, it's common to see headlights stream through the window, light up the ceiling, fade, then intensify. It means someone's just come home, so when the ceiling above Kira lit up, we thought nothing of it, assuming Mom was finally coming back from wherever she went that night. Mom has a habit of pulling in then checking her phone for whatever knows how long before coming inside. After a couple of minutes, I noticed the small, motion sensor light Mom set up on a table on the porch light up. Right after the light went off, we both heard the storm door open, but we didn't hear anyone pressing the code keys of our lock or jiggling the door handle, like Mom usually does right away. The moment the storm door creaked open, our 2 dogs jumped up and ran to the door, barking like mad. Our golden greyhound mix, Calvin, has a deep and scary bark. Samson, who is a big dog, jumps up on his hind legs and scrabbles to one of the small windows in a desperate attempt to see who's outside. Immediately, the storm door slammed shut, and we heard heavy footsteps on the cement of our porch. Calvin started going nuts and jumped up on Kira's couch, standing on its back instead of the cushions to look out the window. Samson ran out the room and went out the doggy door that leads to the back porch, which is a ramp going down into a fenced-off portion of our yard. I sat there, my mind steadily going blank as my heart sped up and my limbs refused to move. Kira gets up and spins around and looks out the window but can't see anything because, besides the motion light on the porch, it's too dark. So, naturally, she gets up, grabs a stray dog toy which just so happens to be a tug-of-war rope with a ball on one end, and opens the door. I tell her very calmly to shut the door and stay inside. She ignored me and stepped out onto the porch. She comes back inside after not seeing anything, but, to my utter disbelief, she disappears into the kitchen, comes back with a knife, and goes outside again. This time, she's gone for a handful of seconds before running back inside and slamming the door shut. Breathless, she tells me she went out a bit into the yard and saw the outline of a man by the run-down dog kennel we don't use anymore. When she saw him and froze, he moved. This time, she listened to me when I told her to lock the door. I managed to call Mom and she convinced me to get up and make sure all the doors were locked, including the basement and making sure the dogs were inside. After Mom got home and looked around, finding nothing, we called the non-emergency number for the police, not wanting to bother them in case we were overreacting. 2 cops came by and walked around our yard and found nothing. We got the sense they didn't believe us, but instead saw us as 2 overexcited girls with exaggerated imaginations. Still, they humored us and told us, after we told them about the park, that if we think anyone might be following us, or if someone's acting a little too creepy, not to drive straight home and to check if anyone's following us. Then, they left. But when we heard those footsteps and Kira went outside, she swears she saw someone. The dogs don't run up to the door like that and bark their heads off if no one's there. I don't know if whoever was at our house was the same guy that ran into us at the park. If it was, I don't know the reason why he cut in front of us multiple times. I don't know if he was in the car that inched behind us and stopped when we stopped. I don't know what would have happened if Calvin didn't have a scary and manic bark. I don't know much of anything, but what I do know is, if you're out and about, minding your own business, and a stranger is taking a lot of notice of you, following you, frequently running into you, or whatever, trust your gut. Don't drive or walk straight home, meander, get to a public space, or just take your time. Pay attention to your surroundings. You never know who is watching you. This happened a few years ago when I was an 18-year-old girl in high school. I worked at a store in the mall of my mid-sized Midwestern city, and that evening, I worked a closing shift. I was walking back to my car in the snowy darkness when a black SUV pulled up beside me. A woman opened the window and yelled, "Hey, excuse me, I need your help." She was a round-faced woman in her 30s or 40s and spoke with a very heavy Spanish accent. She went into a story about how her sister got into a car accident and the woman needed to get gas in her car before she could help the sister. However, she could not find a gas station and had no money, and she even said she had driven around to several churches to ask for help, but no one would help her. She was difficult to understand and did not tell the story super clearly, but I understood that she needed to find a gas station and she needed me to pay for it. She told the story between sobs and she seemed so desperate that I was moved to help her. I told her that she could follow my car to a gas station that was just across the highway and that I would buy her some gas. At the gas station, I parked in front of the store and was surprised when she did not pull up to a gas pump, as I had expected. I got out of my car and said, "Okay, don't you want me to buy and pump gas for you?" She then said something like I had misunderstood her first story. She didn't need gas. She needed money to give to her sister, and added a bunch of other facts I don't remember to continue the story. Her accent and changing story was difficult to understand. I said, "Well, I don't have cash on me, only my card. I suppose I could see if there's an ATM inside?" She immediately replied that she knew there was, which definitely is suspicious in hindsight, but I didn't pick up on it at the time. I agreed to go in and get her some money from the ATM, and as I turned to go inside, she said, "Wait, but if you give me money, I will have to repay you somehow." I said, "No, that's okay, you don't have to." She said, "No, give me your phone number so I can contact you to meet up later so I can repay you, or give me your address and I will send the money to you." I refused both, and she tried again several more times, begging me to meet up with her later to give me the money. This probably lasted 5 minutes or so. Finally, as I refused the last time, she said in a very chilling way, "Don't be so nice." Despite all of this, I for some reason was still convinced she needed my help, and I went into the gas station to use the ATM. However, in my teenage wisdom, I could not remember my PIN number, and was unable to withdraw money. I went back outside to tell the woman, and she rolled her eyes, huffed something under her breath, and very quickly got into her car and sped off. I never saw her again after that. As I drove home, I became suspicious about the scenario. I figured out after a while that the woman was definitely trying to scam me for my money, but it disturbed me more that she tried so hard to get me to meet up with her later and give her contact information. I just hope that I never have to meet someone like that in the future. When I was young, I used to live in rural Pennsylvania. Where I lived wasn't quite suburbs, but the houses were all within walking distance of each other, and we knew nearly all of our neighbors. My small neighborhood was blocked off from the ones on either side by decent-sized creeks, and to get to them you needed to climb down a fairly steep slope. This is an important detail later. My friend Rachel was a bit younger than me, by 2 or 3 years. I was 11 at the time. We had decided to go on a bike ride and ended up dropping our bikes and helmets at the top of the hill leading down to one of the creeks, and we went exploring. We were making a racket, I'm sure, squealing as we jumped around trying not to get wet. We noticed bubbles in the water and became concerned for the swans that lived down at the other end of the creek in the pond. Out of nowhere we heard a man chuckling and he was standing at the top of the hill above near where we were standing. I said nothing. He asked what we were doing and slowly started making his way down the rough terrain of the slope. He obviously didn't know where the path to come down was. Rachel answered him that we were trying to find out where the bubbles were coming from and that she was scared it would hurt the swans, as there had never been any bubbles before today. He told us he could take a water sample and test it if we could bring it up to him, then asked our names and how old we were, still making his way down to us the entire time. Rachel told him her name and had started to say mine when I stopped her by grabbing her shoulder. I had an extremely bad feeling about this man, and I was very uncomfortable with the situation. I perked my head up looking off to the side and asked her, "Did you hear that, Rachel? I think your mom is calling us." I turned and dragged her up the path across from where the man was climbing down at, and we jumped on our bikes. I noticed this man's car parked next to where we put our bikes. Our helmets were missing. We heard the man scrambling after us, screaming that he hadn't heard anything. We started pedaling back toward my house, as Rachel lived in a different neighborhood, and the man started following us in a car after he finally reached the top. The man was still trying to get us to talk to him, so I turned off into my uncle's yard where I saw my cousin out cutting the lawn and started yelling for him. He was a big dude, 16 or so at the time, and the man in the car burnt rubber speeding off when he saw we were no longer alone. We ended up calling the police, and we were not the first girls that had the same issue with a man of that description and that car that day. So whatever that man's intentions were, I'm just glad that Rachel and I didn't have to experience them. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This was my very first apartment and I was so excited to be in it. My freshman year I lived in a dorm on campus, and before that I just lived with my mom, so I had never lived on my own before. The apartment was a 2-bathroom and 2-bedroom, and I shared it with my friend who I had known since we were 13. I had just turned 20 when all this happened. Josh was my friend and it was his first year at the university, so naturally I showed him around. We did pretty much everything together. Fast forward to the homecoming football game. We attend a university that's crazy into football and we're actually a pretty good team, so the homecoming game is a big deal to everyone. Josh was so excited to go out because it was his first homecoming game. He was going to go with this boy he started flirting with and he wanted me to come along. I don't really remember why I didn't want to go, I just didn't. Josh got mad at me, we said dumb stuff to each other and he left, so I was alone for the rest of the night. I had, still do, a small dog, Poppy, who lived with us. She was around a year old at the time. We actually had a pretty relaxing night in the beginning. I took a shower and put on face mask and Poppy and I watched TV in bed and stuff. I remember listening to a song on repeat the entire day because that's what I do when I find a new song that I like. To this day, I still can't listen to it without being reminded. We went to sleep around 10 PM I think. I wasn't keeping up with what was going on with the football game, so I really have no idea if it was just ending or whatever, but I knew not to expect Josh home early because he was going out with the guy he was seeing, Dylan, afterwards. There is a strip of bars along one of the main roads running towards campus, and that's where they would be. That's where everyone would be after the game ended. I don't know what time it was, but I woke to cabinets being slammed and really loud noises. It was really dark in my room and the only thing I could see was that the kitchen lights were on. I saw the light coming through the bottom of the door. It sounded like people were going through our kitchen cabinets one by one. Poppy was at the edge of the bed barking like a crazy dog. I had never seen her act this way. I was struggling to keep myself awake because I'm a really heavy sleeper, not anymore, and I just knew it wasn't Josh or Dylan, but some stupid part of me decided to call out, "Hello?" But it was weak sounding and I really don't know if they heard me or not. Suddenly, my bedroom door opened. I shot up. Poppy was snarling and trying to lunge at the stranger in my bedroom. I couldn't see anything because the light from the open door was kind of blinding. I just saw his figure. He was wearing a hoodie and he stood there for maybe 15 seconds and I was just staring at him. The whole time Poppy was trying to screw him up. He quickly closed my door and I don't know why, I just didn't move. Then my door flings open a second time and we're staring face to face again, for the same painfully long amount of time. My heart was racing and I remember thinking, he's gonna hurt me. Now that I look back, I should have screamed or something. Poppy was at the very edge of the bed now, vicious and snarling. She sounded like a big dog, honestly. And then he slammed my door shut. As soon as he did, I jumped out of my bed and locked my door. I heard them take my car keys. I was terrified they would find my car and steal it since I had just parked directly outside. I frantically called 911 and was sobbing the whole time. I said, "Someone is in my house, they came in my room, please help." And it took them 30 minutes to get there, when I know that there were cop cars everywhere surrounding the bar since it was homecoming, which I live a 5-minute drive from. When I finally came out, the living room and my roommate's bedroom were completely ransacked. My roommate's TV was on the floor because they tried to carry it out, but I guess decided just to leave it. They stole my Xboxes and all my games. They stole my book bag with my textbooks and my homework in it. The 2 policemen got here and I told them everything and asked if I could call my roommate. Josh picked up the phone but was heavily slurring and I could tell that he was inside of a bar and could barely hear me. I just screamed, "Please give Dylan the phone," hoping that Dylan was at least more sober than Josh was, so Josh put Dylan on the phone, and I don't know how, through my tears and sobs and through the screaming, people, and house music, but he heard me say that our apartment was robbed. He frantically said, "We are coming," and hung up. They probably ran. While I was waiting for them, one of the policemen asked if he could try to take prints from my roommate's TV and I agreed. He proceeds to then drop his flashlight directly on the screen, and as it shattered, he just looked at me. So then Josh and Dylan get back and the policemen totally change their tone. They get aggressive and say that they were targeted for a reason. I'm pretty sure that since it was homecoming, the robbers were not expecting me to be there, and were trying to just rob apartments blindly. We also lived on the ground floor, so it's easier to get in those than in the 2-story and 3-story apartments. Josh is in the military, but Josh looks just like any other regular college freshman boy, and his only friends at the time were literally me and Dylan, so we were the only ones who knew he was in the military. They tried to accuse Josh of stashing guns and drugs everywhere, and that's why we got robbed. I literally was like, "Are you kidding me?" They then tried to pull me to the side and say that Josh hired people to come rob his own apartment while I was inside. They asked me, "How do you know these guys?" I said, "Sir, I have known Josh since we were 13. We moved here together to attend university together. He just gave me a look." When they left, we got our locks immediately changed, and then I had to take the next day off of school to drive to the nearest Nissan dealership, 30 minutes away, and then wait 7 hours for them to rewire a key fob for me. To the men who robbed me, and to the cops who accused my roommate of robbing his own apartment, I hope I don't have to meet you again. This happened to me 4 years ago when I was 16 years old on a school trip, but I still remember it to this day. I had recently graduated from one school and enrolled in another, more advanced one via special program. Germany's system of education is sometimes complicated. There were about 20 people who did the same as me, and we were all put in one class to catch up with the regular students. To get to know each other better, the class went on a 3-day trip to a youth hostel in our county town. The trip was organized by our school and overall pretty nice. 2 of my friends had transferred with me and we had fun, except for the second evening. It was late summer and the sun was still up despite it already being around 7 p.m. One of my friends, Sarah, and I decided that we wanted to go for a walk before accompanying our other classmates to the river to have some drinks. We wanted to visit the newly built benches along the river and just talk for a bit. To get to those benches, we walked over a long parking lot next to the river. Between the parking lot and the river, there was a small path which was, in some places, divided from the parking lot by a small grass strip with a few bushes and trees. On the other side of the parking lot, there was a bridge approach which could be used by cars and pedestrians alike. This will get relevant later. There were some rocks in the parking lot to prevent cars from driving too far and falling into the river. My friend and I had some fun by jumping from one rock to the other. At some point, a man on a bicycle, probably in his early 20s, emerged next to us on the other side of the parking lot. He applauded us for some weird reason we didn't understand. My friend applauded back ironically, and we just continued walking but stopped jumping on the rocks. When we arrived at the benches, we chose the first one we came across and sat down. Bicycle guy stopped right next to us, got off his bike and just lingered. I started to feel uneasy, but since there were no free benches left, I thought he just wanted to hang out there too. At some point, he pulled out his cell phone and called someone. Even though he was right next to us the whole time, I couldn't understand him because he was speaking a foreign language. Sarah and I sat there for about 1 to 2 hours until it started getting darker. Bicycle guy was still right next to us and still on the phone, circling the area around us and just generally creeping us out by continuously staring at us. At this point, Sarah had also started feeling uneasy and we shared our feelings about this guy. Since it was almost dark, there was no one around anymore. We wanted to return to the hostel. The second we got up and started walking towards the parking lot, Bicycle guy also got onto his bike. My heart sank into my stomach when I realized he was going the same direction, just slow enough to stay next to us. He continued following us. When exiting the bench area, Sarah and I took the path next to the river to get to the parking lot. Directly at the beginning of the parking lot, there was one part where the path had one of the strips with trees next to it. Bicycle guy directly went past us and onto the parking lot, passing the trees on the right side. We went to the left. He continued staring at us before he went further ahead. The second Sarah and I set a foot on the path, I stopped her and told her that if he turned around after the trees to get onto our path, which he would have no reason for if he didn't want anything from us, we would turn around and run the opposite direction. Well, Bicycle guy turned onto our path. We booked it out of there as fast as we could while desperately clutching each other's hands while Bicycle guy was following us. There was not a single person around to help us, so running was our only chance. We couldn't process what was happening to us in that moment, but we just knew that we needed to run. Remember the bridge approach I mentioned earlier? We went across the smallest part of the parking lot and went up there so we could take another route back. While walking up the narrow sidewalk, still grabbing each other's hands, we glanced down onto the parking lot. If I hadn't been sure that he was following us, then I definitely was in that moment. Down on the parking lot there was Bicycle guy, circling the area and staring us down while we were almost running up the bridge. It got even worse. We were halfway up when suddenly, another guy on a bicycle passed us and stopped a few meters in front of us. He started talking to Bicycle guy who had been following us and then also stared at us. Bicycle guy had basically called another friend over for whatever he was trying to do. Sarah and I immediately changed to the other side of the bridge approach and took the stairs down there. We chose to take a route where we wouldn't be alone on the streets. I was shaking the whole walk back. I am incredibly thankful for my gut feeling. To this day, I still think about this encounter when I'm walking somewhere alone in the evening or night. I don't think I'll be able to forget this anytime soon. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7 years old, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs, and I lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that if you get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel drive to get up to our house, we can see the entire length of the driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we moved in, my dad got a promotion at work, and as a result, started to go to conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to a week, at least a couple times a year. My mom felt nervous about being home alone with 2 young kids. I was 10 and my brother was 6, and so we decided to get a dog. We knew we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was 9 months when we took him home, and already pushing 70 pounds. We believe he's a German Shepherd mixed with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, and a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds, and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my brother and I, loved our cats, it was a big ball of joy around anyone we brought into our house. He tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs, and very protective of us, especially of my mom and I. Once, the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles on our property without telling us first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had them trapped in their truck. It was jumping up and barking at their windows. I doubt he would really have attacked them if they'd gotten out of their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime, my dad was at work, and my mom was home with my brother and I, since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mom was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by, with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky all of a sudden sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking and howling. He makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck pull off from the main road and into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup truck slowly ambled up our drive, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until he pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant, red chunks of meat with some of the limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Just a weird man who looked to be in his early 50s, driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really, really bad vibe from the guy, and I remember my mom telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mom, and she had her hand around his collar. The guy rolled down his window and asked my mom if she wanted to purchase some meat. My mom said no and to please leave our property. Instead, he went on about the different types of meat and asking how much we wanted, beef, venison, pork, etc. My mom asked him to leave again, but instead, he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet were on the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mom, and asked, "Does your dog bite?" And my mom, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky, and I'm guessing decided not to mess with the giant, snarling beast. He got back in his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he was really selling the meat or not, but apparently he'd been around to our neighbors, who also had gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really up to with his giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else. We never saw that guy again. Rocky's still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and completely deaf, but he's still out in the yard on summer days, watching over us. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least as a crow flies from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So when we got to the campsite, a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put the tent up / make dinner, etc. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up this steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up and barking. Now the day before I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark, saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago, and I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement, before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while still concerned, I started hiking up this steep hill to hand the bag. It was so steep I had to use the trees to balance and lean against so I didn't go tumbling down, before making another 5 to 6 step push to the next tree I could just lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making up this hill ridge, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill, and I hear a whole lot of big movement at about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep low growl to a savage, slobber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest, and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in the matter of seconds. Because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try to save me, in which he will most likely die, and I'm stuck here. If I have to get off that hillside fast, I almost 100% am going to trip and fall off the 12-15 foot cliff onto the boulders below, like hundreds of 5 to 20 foot boulders. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. Then I hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down at my campsite, which is just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent, so she didn't wander off like I was away. So yeah, I'm absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds after I kinda snap back to it, I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order. I call my dog back to me. He comes and sits against my feet as my back is against a tree, so I'm kinda pinned / stuck there for a moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I try to collect myself. This is when I realized I'd completely forgot that I had my headlamp on. I reach up so fast up to turn my lamp on, I basically punch myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline dumps going right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection off the eyes of whatever is up there. Peering and peering, nothing. But I had just heard something. We both did, and whatever it was didn't get away or sound like it had made it too far. I knew something was there, so I'm kinda just steadfast at this point. I need to know what is up there because I have to sleep here tonight. And you know, I'm out in the middle of nowhere alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night is my thought process. So yeah, as I'm looking up this hill, and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me. He does a fake / bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement, something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon / sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover, so I'm zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch, and what I make out made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy stuff with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly. Actually, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something. But I knew we were staring right at each other at that moment, so I stare for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know I saw him, but I guess I was just too shaken to speak. As I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared, and I also had to get off that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt / risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully, I start heading down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up, and look in that direction again, just to make it even more clear I saw him, and eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought she was barking just to bark back, or at my dog, but when I get there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling, with her tail sticking straight out. Still trying to hold it together, I thought okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out, but I was positive I had zipped it so the zipper tab / openings was at the very top of the tent door, out of reach. So, in a mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my pistol. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my stuff and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks, it was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle, but thankfully there were other people there. We sat around a fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They started to tell me they are planning to head that way where I was the night before in the morning, so I tell them my story in detail. Needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all that. The thing that still creeps me out to this day though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on, other people had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered last year. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005 when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area, a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres, down outside of that area, and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, but also gave us some quality father and son time. I remember the drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. That car was so uncomfy, I hated it. All I had to do was either stare out the window or try and beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive, obviously, took most of the day, so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone else lease it that year yet, and the cabin and the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in scouts for a couple years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin on the land we settled in, the cabin was pretty rough, dust and dirt everywhere, flies. I remembered that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I was never able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guessed was an hour maybe. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer and horribly hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for an hour or so, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs. Typical torn up ground where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there, not to mention the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us with his hands in his pockets. Weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and it looked like to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 outside by then. My dad called out again, no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip to his pistol holster. We approached the person's right side and then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down, watched him circle around to the front of the man, all the while talking to him asking if he was okay. He finally passed around to the front of the man and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" and he called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new, no dust, sap, bird droppings, or signs of being outside for more than a day at most. At that moment I looked at my dad and could see him get worried. Almost immediately after I felt that feeling again, like we were being watched, and I knew my dad felt it too. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but in reality it was only about 45 minutes. After returning, we packed up and beat feet. We drove back home that day and didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out the next week when he was in the area. He also said that he never had an issue with people because his property was high fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the least possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had the same feeling but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week he got a call from his buddy and he checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone, no mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. I honestly have no idea what that mannequin was. So this happened to me a couple of years ago when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse in a pretty decent area. My husband was working third shift as a corrections officer at our local corrections facility and I was working as a waitress/bartender. It was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took advantage and decided to take my husband's 80-pound Alaskan Malamute Siberian Husky mixed dog on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We get to the end of the street that leads into the complex we live in, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I notice as the dog, Luke, stops to relieve himself that there's a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I have my phone out texting a friend and looked back up to notice the guy was near the stop sign, also relieving himself on the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away and led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think this guy noticed us and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I hear him walking a few feet behind me and just keep my head down staring at my phone with Luke glued to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear this guy's steps getting closer. Luke realizes there is someone behind us and he stops in his tracks. Mind you, he's a big dog compared to my 5'2" self, but I can handle him pretty easily and he's a very well trained dog by my husband. But I noticed his ears were perked up and his tail was straight up. I was glad that he was aware of our surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving and away from this guy. This guy finally catches up, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me and step into the grass to allow this guy to pass us and keep Luke out of his way. Does this guy keep going on and pass? Nope. When I thought he was about to pass us, I stuttered out a small apology because Luke was pulling on his leash a little to investigate this guy, and most people did get intimidated by him just by his size. The guy stops and just stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and booze rolling off of him and to notice he is probably in his mid to late 20s, dark hair, scruffy looking, and just dirty. He smiles and then finally seems to notice Luke trying to get at him and asks, "Cute dog, what's his name?" Instead of making up a name, I just say Luke. He then proceeds to ask me if he can pet my dog, and before I can even give him an answer, he leans down to start petting Luke's head. Luke did not like that. Luke jumped at him as a warning and the guy backed up chuckling. I apologized and mentioned that he was very protective and made up a lie that he was trained as my dad's former K9 unit. My dad is a software developer. Instantly, I saw this guy's face change. He asked me what my name was and I gave him a fake name. He then asked me if I lived around here and I said I was visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He then made a sudden step towards me, and I'm not lying when I say I have never heard my husband's dog growl in the 5 years I have been with him, but the sound that came from my dog sounded like something coming from nightmares. Luke's hair was spiking on his spine and he was throwing himself up on his back legs and kicking his from legs at this guy. He had put himself completely between myself and the guy and snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much he stumbled backward, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, "We'll have a nice night, cutie," and stumbled off down the road. When I say my heart was pounding, it was deafening. I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I got back to my townhouse and locked all the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature I have ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing him react the way he did made me realize that I needed to get out of the situation and fast. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at nighttime. This is due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So, we tend to walk around parks in the area when they've become somewhat secluded. My 120-pound black boxer / lab named Loki could be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. I was dead wrong. On one specific night in the fall of 2016, I could recall of an encounter that reminds me of why I am so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This specific park is one I have been to a couple times, and from what I remember, this park is usually secluded around 6:30 and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path I take. I also like to put on my headphones and listen to music while I walk, but on this specific night I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyway, the walk was going as usual. Loki did his business and we continued on our usual path. About midway on our walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. Since he was done with his business, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. This path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area and there were still leaves on the branch. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling as if I was being watched. I could not for the life of me shake off the feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every time I did, no one was there. In fact, no one was anywhere. This whole shortcut was essentially secluded. Suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. I told him, "Loki, come on boy, we've got to go." One thing I failed to mention was that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I was also curious and a bit nervous, but I surely did not want to find out what he heard or noticed. I just wanted to get out as soon as possible. I pulled a little and he began to walk, but every now and then I'd see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of him walking, he stopped again and this time he began to growl. Despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog, so I took this chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I could not see well, so I used my phone's flashlight to see what was up. Trees, just trees. What he heard was probably some kind of small animal. Once again, I turned around and kept walking. He continued to peer back once in a while still, but this time I noticed it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, just squirrels, maybe a bird, and I ignored it. Then, I heard what appeared to be actual footsteps and branches breaking. There is absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick and still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a figure that I could only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appear from out the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing, his hair was long and was graying. He had one hand in his pocket and he said to me, "Nice dog you have there, kid. What breed is he?" "He's a boxer / lab," I replied. "Oh, I love dogs. Mind if I pet him?" he wondered. The man got closer and emerged from the trees. As he got closer, I realized that he was quite tall. Loki instantly got bad vibes. He ran behind me and started to bark at him. Actually, I do kinda mind. My dog here doesn't like strangers. Sorry, but it's probably not best if you pet him, I quickly stated. It's okay, really, he seems like a friendly guy, just a little pet wouldn't harm him, the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable as he appeared to get closer and closer. I don't know why this guy couldn't take no for an answer. I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared he'd bite you or something, I told him as I began to walk away. I don't know why you just won't let me introduce myself to him, the guy replied angrily. This time I began to speed walk. I was very uncomfortable and my fight or flight instincts began to take over. He followed us and kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was under the influence of something, but he did not let up. I won't lie, I started to get a little angry. Why can't a guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us. Loki and I both took this as an answer to start sprinting a bit. I don't remember much of the running, it was all a blur to me, but I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast. I also realized that his intentions may have not been just to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with him. I looked behind me and he was in pursuit. Maybe about 10 feet behind me he was chasing us. Finally, the path led to the park exit and into the busier streets. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. I made sure no one was following me and I even made sure to walk on the populated streets. After what seemed like an eternity, we got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get any sleep. From my window in the porch, I watched all night with Loki, just to see if anyone had followed us home. I also made a police report with my parents. After all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious and who knows what his true intentions were. Ever since, I haven't walked Loki in that park. I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone one piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, do not ever let your guard down. This happened about a year ago to me and my husband. It was our 10th anniversary, so we decided to go camping, just the two of us, and of course our dog. There's a big national park / camping area near where we live, little less than an hour drive, so that was where we were heading. It's basically a big forest with many small lakes, ponds, trails, and camping sites around. Pretty popular place during summer, but we still saw some people, even though it was late September and the weather was cold. We found a good spot next to a lake to set up our camp. It was a beautiful day, so we wanted to hike a bit in the forest. There was a nice long path that was going around the lake where we had our camp, so we chose to go that way. The lake was quite small, and there was another camping site by it. You could see there from our camp, and from there you could see our camp. They were almost on opposite sides of the lake. We walked past another camp, and saw a man there alone just standing and staring at us, not answering when we greeted him. He was maybe in his late 20s, around the same age as us. I thought at that point that maybe he was just shy and a little weird. He had a small tent set up and some other stuff all around the place, so I figured he had been there for a while. We just continued walking and didn't think much to it. Eventually we got to our camp, and started to set up our tent before it's too dark. We made some food by the fire and just sat there enjoying the peace. Suddenly, our dog starts barking like crazy. She was tied to a long wire around a tree. We immediately realized that she wasn't just paranoid and that there was something really in the woods, and it was near. It had been very dark for hours at this point. I took the dog to a leash and my husband started to look around with his bright headlamp. Our dog just kept barking. We were confused and sure it was some kind of animal, maybe a bear or a moose, but we couldn't understand why it wasn't scared of us and why it wouldn't run away. My husband went ahead to the path that leads to the other camp. Right when he got to the path, which was just less than 10 meters away from our camp, he saw something on the ground. I told him to go check it out and followed with our dog. He stopped, turned at me and said, "It's a human, laying on the ground." The first thing I thought was that maybe they were hurt or dead or something. They just laid there not moving, facing the ground. We asked, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" And they just suddenly stood up. Turned out, it was the guy from the other camp. He was very scared of our dog and told me to not let her near him. I was kind of relieved that it wasn't some bear that was going to eat us, but I soon learned that a bear might have been less scarier than this guy. After he stood up, he walked straight to our campfire and sat down. My husband tried to ask him multiple times why he was sneaking in the dark forest without any light. He didn't give us an answer. We even laughed a bit and told him how we thought that he was a bear or something, but he didn't even smile, just stared at the fire, looking annoyed. His right leg was soaking wet. He probably stepped off the path and dipped it in the lake on his way to our camp. He sat with us for 30 minutes, not talking much. He also clearly wanted to know where our dog was at all times. I saw he had a knife hanging from his belt, but I guess it's not that weird when you're in the woods. Every few minutes he put his hand in his pocket and just peeked at whatever was in there. Kind of like checking the time on your phone without taking it out from your pocket, but it wasn't a phone he had there. I felt very uncomfortable and anxious by the whole situation. So, when the 30 minutes had passed, he again stood up and mumbled about going back to his own camp, and left. He never gave us any explanation of why he came to our camp or why he was stalking us in the dark. He tried very hard not to be seen when we found him. When I thought he was far enough, I told my husband that there's no way I'm sleeping in that tent. The biggest nope ever. Fortunately for me, he agreed and said that that guy might come back when we are sleeping. I just wanted to leave as soon as possible, so my husband started packing up things up. Our car's nearby, thank goodness, and I was guarding and looking around with the light if he comes back. Just when we had almost all of our stuff in the car, I saw a quick flash of light on the path from the guy's camp towards ours. He was coming back. Maybe he thought we went to sleep because he couldn't see our campfire anymore. So yeah, we got in the car and left real quick. I don't know if we overreacted, but I had such a bad feeling about him. Who crawls in the dark, wet forest alone just to stalk some strangers? What would have he done if our dog wouldn't have hurt him? What were his motives? I don't know and didn't want to stay there and find out. I'm just glad that we had our dog with us. There's a chance that she saved our lives. This happened to me when I was 19 and in college. I met a guy named Sam through a friend of a friend. Sam seemed nice enough and I would see him around, but that's as far as it went. One day we managed to end up alone. As I'm coming out of my building, he sees me and starts chatting me up. At first it was simple small talk, but I became uncomfortable once he starts complimenting me saying I have nice teeth. Not nice smile, but nice teeth. I thought this was a weird way to phrase a compliment, but I just ignore it. He then goes on to ask me, what are you? Meaning he wants to know my ethnicity. I tell him I'm Latina. He asks if I speak Spanish and I say yes. He makes a comment saying he likes Shakira's music and that he likes her song La Tortura. He then asks me what La Tortura means. I tell him it translates to the torture. I notice his eyes get wide and he starts smiling. At this point I'm done talking to him and I tell him I have to go. I make a mental note to stay away from him after that because throughout the rest of the conversation he had a really creepy smile on his face. I get busy with classes so I forget about him quickly. One day I get a call on my cell phone from an unknown number. I decide to answer it and I hear a raspy male voice breathe heavily and say, La Tortura. I hang up and think what was that, but I just take it as a stupid prank and move on with my day. For the next week or two I keep getting calls from an unknown number but I don't answer. Weeks go by. I had forgotten about the phone calls when I end up running into Sam again outside my building. He starts making small talk again, then with a giant grin he says, have you been getting any phone calls lately? It takes me a second to realize that it's been him calling me from that unknown number. I don't want him to see me reacting so I say no, but internally I'm freaking out. He then goes on to tell me, I've been watching you through your window for weeks and you never noticed. For context, my dorm window was split into 3 parts. One big glass pane in the middle, with 2 smaller panes on either side that you could open for fresh air. If those side panels were open enough, you had enough room to slip your hand in, move the curtain out the way, and get a good look inside. Obviously after that I was thoroughly creeped out and was wondering how many times he watched me dress, nap, or do any of the other things you do in the comfort of your own space. I ended the conversation somehow and wondered what I should do. After I calmed down, I decided to report what he said to me to my residential advisor and then reported it to the director of housing at our school. Luckily the director took the situation seriously and encouraged me to report him to campus police. A report was made. They would have to speak to him to get his response to my allegations, and I was told that in the meantime if he approaches me again I should come back and make another report. A couple of days later, the director of housing comes to my dorm to tell me that campus police spoke to Sam and he admitted to them that he told me he had been watching me but that it was all a joke. He was told to stay away from me and I was told to report him again if he kept harassing me, but it never went further than that. Over the next few days, I end up telling the girls in my dorm what happened with Sam. They obviously think it's gross, so we make plans to go out on campus as a group for the time being and to keep our curtains closed. Going out as a group definitely made me feel safer and everything was fine for a little while until, one day, we are coming out of the dorm dining hall and we run into Sam and some of his friends. He sees me, gets visibly upset, and starts approaching me yelling, "Why did you tell him what I said?" I got scared thinking he might do something, but luckily my dorm mates rallied around me and rushed me out of there. I knew he was mad about reporting him because before this happened our mutual friend, a male, had told me, "He's mad that you reported him." Thankfully, this is the last time I was ever near that guy. The school year ended soon after this happened. I moved off campus, got a new friend group, and moved on. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't made a report and ignored him. When I was 16, I used to attend English classes that were for people of all ages, so I was used to having colleagues older than me that also wanted to improve their language skills. I was really close to another girl my age back then, Jasmine. She was much more popular than me, so she would always introduce me to new people. One day I noticed this guy in her group. He was 32 and very talkative, always smiling. For some reason though, he made me feel uncomfortable from the get-go. I think it's because he would stare at me for no apparent reason. While everyone was talking as a group, he seemed to address me specifically every time, but I didn't give it much thought. As the days passed, he started waiting around before my classroom door and started conversations about my friendship with Jasmine, my high school, my family, etc. I thought it was weird that he was so interested, given that he was much older, but I felt guilty for feeling bad, like he was just being nice and I was being mean to think he was weird. I should have listened to my instinct. Instead, I forced myself to answer, to make small talk. He told me how close he was with Jasmine, and that made me feel a bit safer. When I asked her about him though, she said she didn't know him that well, but that he seemed nice enough. One day I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I picked it up, it was him. He said he got my number from Jasmine. I was upset and confronted her about giving my number to him, and she said he insisted, so she ended up agreeing to it. He started calling me all the time, like 2 to 3 times a day, to ask about my day, saying he missed me and wanted to chat. He started telling me private stuff about his life because he felt like he could talk to me since I was so mature for my age. I didn't like it, so I stopped answering, or would make an excuse and quickly hang up. And he would send me messages. That's when things started getting worse. The messages would vary in tone. Sometimes they were really childish, with lots of emojis. He would wish me a lovely day or say he was thinking of me. Other times they would simply say, "You're so pretty, too pretty," with no context. He would say he was glad I didn't have a boyfriend, that I should never get one or he would be mad. I never answered to those and showed them to Jasmine. I told her I didn't want to see or talk to him anymore before or after class, and she said she would help. I started going to class late so I wouldn't meet him in the corridors. I leave class immediately after the end, but I saw him watching me. I could feel he knew what I was doing but actually sort of enjoyed it. I felt like it was a game to him, making me feel uncomfortable. He stopped talking to Jasmine and everyone else, but continued to message me saying, "I miss you," or "Why are you so busy?" I blocked his number. I thought that would be the end of it, and started relaxing a bit, but one day I was talking to another girl outside the school and he showed up, with a big smile, and said that it's been too long, and why I wasn't answering his messages. He acted like he was worried about me, that I was studying too much, etc. He invited me to go have a coffee with him in his house. I told him no and went inside, where I pretended to study in the library until he left. He waited around doing nothing more for an hour. I started really being scared then. Since that day he invited me to his house, he became more aggressive, making fun of me whenever he bumped into each other in the corridor, saying stuff like, "Still busy," or "I'm in no hurry." He found my social medias and sent me messages there, each time more explicit. He would comment on my pictures saying I was sexy and that he knew what I was up to, teasing me. I blocked him everywhere, but I always felt like he was watching me all the time. He stopped talking to me but would always stare at me in class. One day I was going back home alone after class. I noticed a car was right next to me, driving slowly, and when I looked it was him. He talked to me through the window and invited me in, said he would give me a ride home. It was a residential street, not many people around. I said no and continued walking. He kept insisting and saying he knew where I lived, he could drop me there. I started walking fast then, stopped interacting with him at all. I just wanted to get to the main road so there would be more people around. He got angry then, said, "Get in a voice I almost didn't recognize. I looked at him in shock and his facial expression had changed completely. He had a dark look in his eyes, no smile at all. He looked like he wanted to hurt me. So I ran and got into the first shop I saw, a mini market. I waited until his car left and then sped home. After that I didn't want to go back to class. I asked my mom to change classes. I never told her why. For some reason I felt ashamed, like I somehow caused the situation. I finished the semester without incidents and thought it was all over, but after 2 years, yes, 2 whole years, he came back. By then I was starting university, and any thoughts of him were out of my mind. Until he created a new account on Facebook and started messaging me again, like nothing happened, like no time had gone by. He said he was hurt I cut him out of my life, that he wanted to be my friend. I blocked every account he made without ever answering. One day to my panic he showed up in my campus. I went to a university that was close from home, but still, it couldn't have been a coincidence. He was just across the street, watching me. I hurried and got into a bus before he could talk to me. The next week I wasn't so lucky. I was eating a snack at the cafeteria with a group of friends and he just suddenly came by and introduced himself to everyone, like we were old friends. I could barely breathe. My friends noticed I wasn't feeling well and he seemed to enjoy the confusion and my fear. I pulled him aside and asked him what he was doing, asked him to leave me alone. He said he wouldn't and again had that dark look he had in the car, years before. The creepiest part was just how different it was from the expression he had around everyone else. He looked like a different person. I told him I would tell everyone, and he said he knew I wanted him. He knew I was just a dirty little tease, but that he would get me. My body and mind just shut down when I heard that and I ran back to my friends and started crying. When I finished telling them everything, he had gone away and I never saw him again. When I was 16, what feels like eons ago, I started going to high school that had a public library in it. Upon entering the front doors of the school, there was a wide hallway with the entrance to the library being a straight walk from the school entrance. so it wasn't like outsiders had to walk through the halls to get to it. But it really bothered me that anyone with a library card could be in our school at any given moment that it was open, even if they were only supposed to check out books or use a computer. Having said that, I rarely saw adults that weren't school employees in the library during school hours. My family didn't always have the electricity on, much less the internet, so I would often stay after school to do my homework in the library where I could use the computers. The librarian's desk was in the middle of the library, and there were maybe 24 computers off to one side, in 4 or 5 rows. Other than that, there were a few small rooms where the book club would meet or someone could study privately, which were locked up when not in use. One afternoon, I had a research essay to do. I think it was about Homer's Odyssey, so I had asked my dad to pick me up 2 hours after school ended. I went to the library immediately after my last class and chose a computer close to the librarian's desk. Blissfully, only the librarian and I were in the room. I was really pleased to be able to work quietly, and started plugging it away at my assignment. 30 minutes into writing, I heard the doors of the library open. I didn't look up, but I could hear a man speaking boisterously to the librarian, with her responding in a very chummy way. They were talking like they knew each other very well. After a few minutes of chatting, the librarian excused herself. I can't remember if I heard her say why, but she bustled out of the room and did not return before I left, more than an hour later, which hadn't happened before. I can't say for sure, but I'm almost positive that she was supposed to not leave the library unattended while it was open. They actually closed it when she took lunch sometimes because I'd seen the "back in X minutes" sign on the door previously. Almost as soon as the librarian left, this adult man decided to use a computer. Being that we were the only 2 people using computers, you would think he sat nowhere near me, right? He sat 1 chair away from my right. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was a very large man in every sense of the word, but otherwise, he looked like your average guy with generic black frame glasses. After the first peripheral glance, I tried to avoid looking over at this guy. I also told myself that the librarian knew him, so he's probably okay. Just subdue checking his email. Nothing to be paranoid about. As I'm continuing to research for my essay and make notes, I start hearing this guy giggle in between clicking the mouse. At first quietly, but he starts chuckling within a minute. I didn't want to, but I felt my whole head turn to look at this guy's computer. His monitor was showing what appeared to be a photo covered by colorful jigsaw puzzle pieces. As the guy clicked on the puzzle piece outlines, they disappeared, revealing the picture underneath. When I first looked at it, the picture was completely visible except for 2 pieces. The image was a naked man posing with his arms over his head. The creep looked over at me, still chuckling. I had the feeling he was canvassing for my reaction, which was unmasked disgust. I logged off and moved to a different computer, which I thought sent the message that he may be uncomfortable. I logged into my new computer, and as soon as I started typing, the guy got up, walked over, and sat down next to me. I promptly stood up, kicking over my chair, unplugged the computer. I wanted to log out really fast, and ran out. My dad wasn't going to be there for another 30 minutes, at least, so I waited in the bathroom. Whenever it was about time for me to get picked up, I walked toward the front doors to leave the school, and I decided to peek in the library. The creep was sitting at the computer still, but his body was turned to face the doors and he was looking straight at me, with a big grin on his face. I dropped out of school that year, and this honestly played a part in that decision. I felt so vulnerable, and looking back I think that librarian might have been secretly creeped out by this guy and was playing nice in front of him. She might have made a lame excuse to leave the room so that she didn't have to entertain him, which I would understand if she wasn't leaving him alone with an underage student. I didn't trust the school to take it seriously, especially the librarian, so I didn't tell anyone. I just hope that guy isn't prowling around the high school still. Last year I, a 20-year-old female, had taken the morning off from work so I could pick up my friend from a pretty serious medical procedure. It had been a tense time and I really just wanted her to get through it okay so she could begin to heal and feel better. I live in New York and her appointment was right off of 42nd Street by Grand Central Station, which is arguably one of the most well-populated, busy areas of the city. I had just gotten off the subway and was walking east past Grand Central Station when I made eye contact with this dude walking towards me, and half a block away. He was a thin, looking guy with really creepy eyes, and he was looking basically directly into my soul. It was incredibly unsettling. We were far enough away that I tried to play it off, looked down, and casually strafed to the right a bit so that our paths wouldn't cross. When I looked up, I noticed he mirrored my movements so our paths were directly aligned again. I strafed again to the left and he again moved to be in line with me, eyes still locked on me. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach and started to freak out a little. He was getting much closer now and we were basically trapped in a group of people, so I didn't really have space or time to cross the street. I also didn't want to turn around and go the opposite way because then my back would be towards him. I took my headphones out and kind of slowed down, but he was absolutely still coming for me. When he inevitably got close enough to me that we were within arm's reach of each other, I guess my fight or flight took over and I grabbed him by the shoulders and shoved him aside, sidestepping him. He was full on attempting to collide with me. The group of people around us barely reacted, which is crazy to me. I thought I dodged a bullet, except after shoving him out the way, he began screaming at me. I yelled back at him, "What were you doing? Get out of here, you're creepy, keep moving," and other random phrases that just felt right in the moment. Deep down I think I was just hoping if I made a scene someone would step in to help, but nobody did, and then I noticed that he'd stopped walking and had fully turned his body around to face me again, and then began to walk toward me again. He was yelling at me this time, calling me disgusting, crude names, telling me he was going to smack me and teach me a lesson, etc. I absolutely panicked and began jogging away, only to look back and realizing that he was now jogging after me, still threatening me and screaming at me. He was getting closer and all I could think was find a cop. You're at Grand Central, where are the cops? Not one stranger noticed or intervened. He was literally 10 feet away from me when I finally just ran up to the biggest, burliest dude I could find and yelled help at him. He was a little surprised and didn't do much, but this younger couple next to us stepped in. The guy got in between us and started telling the creepy dude to get lost, that he's making a scene and that he needs to go, etc., while the girlfriend consoled me. The guy glared at me one last time until he finally turned and started walking away, still cursing. I thanked the couple and continued along my way, making it about 5 paces before absolutely breaking down in tears and calling a friend. Thank God for the coffee place nearby that let me loiter while I collected myself before going in to pick up my friend. I thank the universe for that brave couple that stepped in to protect me. To this day I wonder what the man would have done to me if I hadn't shoved him aside or if that couple hadn't stopped him from chasing me. Just goes to show, no matter how many people are around you, if you're having a bad feeling, listen to it, and don't be afraid to yell for help. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.